how do we do these things with God and with other people in such a way that a community can form right there that reflects the priorities of Jesus?
Welcome to the Fresh Expressions podcast. My name is Chris Morton, and I produce this podcast along with our other two shows, the Dinner Church podcast and the Rural Renewal podcast. A few months ago, I started noticing something. Across a large variety of outlets, I was seeing mostly secular writers and reporters delving into a topic known as the loneliness epidemic. Many of them were responding to the Surgeon General's report outlining loneliness and isolation as widespread and detrimental, not just to us as individuals, but even affecting our shared life as a culture, as a nation, as a North American continent. But they were also responding to an increasing amount of research about the drop in attendance in local churches. And as a Christian, I was really interested in understanding this, where the loneliness epidemic and the decline of church attendance goes together. And this is something we know a lot about here at Fresh Expressions. So many of our congregations and denominations and traditions were developed for another time. They were developed for a time when our religious institutions were at the center of society and church attendance was the norm. But as society has shifted, our churches struggle to find their place. In other words, part of the decline in church attendance is due to the fact that the way our churches organize and operate is inaccessible to many of our neighbors and even those who are open to a faith community. Now, at Fresh Expressions, we have hope that churches can reach outside the reach of our typical congregations, but it's going to take new forms, new shapes of Christian community. And one of the reasons we're feeling lonely is, yes, because fewer and fewer people are involved in a local church. But the solution is not simply to convince folks to come to our churches as they look today. Instead, our lonely friends and neighbors will find the community and connection that they long for in faith communities that are rooted in the teachings of Jesus, but also native to their culture and subculture and neighborhoods that they live in. In other words, at Fresh Expressions, we have a bold claim. We claim that these fresh expressions of church are a powerful tool that Christians can use to address the devastating epidemic of loneliness and isolation. The psalmist promised that God places the lonely in families, and we believe that the fresh expressions of church are one of the most compelling ways God is doing this today. Now, as a producer, I'm usually far away from the mic, helping bring together conversations you'll hear on our Fresh Expressions podcast. But to kick this season off, I decided to jump on the mic and turn the tables on some of our best thinkers and leading practitioners here at Fresh Expressions to hear the stories of how they've witnessed the loneliness epidemic and how they have seen God at work through the church to address this devastating problem all around us. Today, we have our regular podcast host, Heather Jallad, Fresh Expressions Assistant Director of Training, and a serial pioneer of new faith communities. We also have Fresh Expressions National Director Shannon Kiser and Luke Edwards, author of Becoming Church, a trail guide for starting fresh expressions. Now, to get us started, I want to read a description from the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory on healing the effects of social connection and community. This was released in 2023. Attorney General Vivek Murthy says that loneliness is far more than a bad feeling. It harms both the individual and societal health. It is associated with greater risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. The mortality impact of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, even greater than associated with obesity and physical inactivity. And the harmful consequences of a society that lacks social connection can be felt in our schools, workplaces, and civic organizations. To get us started, I'd love to hear each of you respond to this statement. Does it ring true to you? How have you personally experienced the loneliness epidemic?
Yeah, I've been following the loneliness epidemic since like 2019. I've been reading like the Cigna loneliness reports and including that in some of the writing that I do. And it wasn't until the pandemic that I really felt loneliness. I'm an introvert, so like if I have one or two close friends, like I'm good. Like I don't need to like see lots of people. But during the pandemic lockdown, we ended up going to my wife's parents' house to stay for like a month and a half while everything was like super locked down, have some help with childcare and whatnot. And just that being taken away from our neighborhood and the friends that were nearby. There's phone calls and Zoom calls, but it just wasn't doing it. And it really hit a point of pretty intense loneliness in the middle of all that, which I think a lot of people did. As far as like after the pandemic, one thing that I notice a lot in my life is a subset of the loneliness epidemic called the crisis of male friendship, and just experiencing personally how much work it is to keep a friendship going as a dad of young kids, working full time, coming home tired, and having to do dad stuff until you have about 30 minutes left in the evening before you go to bed. It's just, you can see how our society's working against us in friendship and belonging.
Yeah. Heather, how have you seen the loneliness epidemic in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing as Luke, in that it became more of a reality for me during the pandemic, and it something that I think is in many cases situational or circumstantial to some degree, right? But is experienced by different people because of different circumstances or situations. And I became more aware of it, frankly, because I had single friends that I knew had to be by themselves all of the time, and I just had such a my heart just hurt for them. I was at home with my husband and my daughters, and at least we had each other to interact with in some sense of rhythm and relationship, and neighbors that we could go out in the driveways with and connect with or whatever. But it wasn't until then where that really kind of came to light for me in full color in a whole new way. I've certainly observed this in my daughters. They're both young adults now, and as teenagers, I think even we could say the same thing. We all kind of experience this idea of like feeling like an outsider, or like we don't fit, or and the loneliness that comes with that, even though we're in a crowded room or have people all around us, that we can feel lonely. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we are isolated in order to feel lonely, but oftentimes it is, that, like I said, that situation or circumstance that we find ourselves in that kind of brings about those feelings and experiences of loneliness.
Yeah. I think you guys bring up some interesting stuff that different types of people experience loneliness differently. Luke talks about parents, young parents, and I know that personally. Heather talks about the young singles out of college trying to figure that out, or even in college if you're making a big shift geographically. The first time I just noticed that there were things out of my control causing loneliness. I moved to San Antonio right out of college to work with a mega church. And I thought I'm going to get the closest place to live as I can. And I got an apartment across the highway from the church building. And the other thing that's going on, it's an interesting city, is it has 5 military bases. So if there were a lot of people who were my age or kind of in my, but they were not in my life stage. And they were folks who were deeply involved in that career and a lot of young families. And so the church itself and the part of the community that I got to know, they didn't know what to do with a single dude. So there was this literal geographic barrier that everyone was separated by highways. You couldn't just walk around to each other. And then there were these just cultural barriers of different life stages and different subcultures and stuff like that made it really, really hard to be a young single person there. So that was the first time I realized that some of this was out of my control, like, or even out of the control of the well-meaning people in our church. They just didn't know what to do with me. And so we're thinking of that. I'd like to hear from you guys, like, where have you seen loneliness specifically in your ministry? Like, how has it affected your ministry? And maybe not just loneliness, but some of this cultural isolation that is a part of the epidemic. How have you seen that affecting how you do ministry?
I mean, for me, with a lot of the dinner, because I've started a lot of dinner church communities, in most cases, there is a segment of that worshiping community that is experiencing some of the hardest challenges in life. Some, whether in recovery or coming out of being in prison, or maybe experiencing homelessness, or just single parents. All different across the spectrum. People that are kind of marginalized. I've just seen how people have found a sense of community in these dinner churches because there is such a diversity of people within them. Not only marginalized people, but people that are everyday people, working class people that, oftentimes can't be a part of a Sunday only worshiping community in some cases. But sometimes people that don't ever eat at a table with other people, but eat alone all of the time. And this is the one, time a week that they can eat with other people and have that sense of relationship and intimacy and, sharing a table and a meal and conversation. So I would say that's primarily how I've experienced that kind of manifesting itself in my own ministry.
Yeah, I remember during the pandemic, my heart went out to people like, Chris and you, Luke, who had young families and were doing all the things, right? And were feeling so isolated. And I remember, like, we've got to inject some joy and fun and relief for these families. And that led us to do some socially distanced kind of family fun experiences, which was safe because they were socially distanced, but they fostered relationships among isolated families that to this day, I can see like those families are connected in a profound way. And then and in the same way, we wound up hosting a virtual school for all of where our multi-purpose room got opened up to kind of little tables socially distanced for kids to come and do virtual school from. These middle school and high schoolers who were just feeling so disconnected from their peers in a time when peers are so important. Well, because of their rhythms of prayer and life together and playful foursquare at lunch outside during break time, those relationships have carried over in profound ways. So I think there's so many things the church can be doing as we think about how do we press into these particular experiences of isolation and loneliness. I see caregiving as being a terribly lonely experience. I see, I just there's immigrants and new immigrants and people who are trying to learn the language and trying to learn the culture and kind of on the edge all the time. Like, that's just a very isolating experience. And so I just think there's lots of ways for the church to start thinking about who is it that is feeling disconnected and lonely, and what could we do about it? I do know that as I work with Todd Bolsinger on these adaptive church cohorts, I would say at least half the churches are pressing into the adaptive challenge of recognizing the disconnection in their larger community and are starting to think about, well, what can we do about that? How can the church be in the midst of that?
What do you think, Luke? Have you seen this popping up in your life, your ministry particularly?
Yeah, noticed in my ministry at King Street Church and Who Let the Dads Out, and with just being a part of the church and helping other churches, is an increasing number of people that wander into our gatherings looking for connection. That we tend to think that people are coming for, good music or good sermons or good programming. Working at a large church, we kill ourselves over programming and offering just these amazing programs, and yet we don't think about how are our gatherings helping people connect with each other. And so I just see that whether people say it aloud or not, I think a lot of the people that wander in are looking for connection. And I've talked to someone that works in a rural church, and someone literally said it out loud to them, hey, I'm not very religious, but I don't know how to make friends out here. I just moved here and I need some connection, so I'm going to start coming to your church if that's cool. And they're like, yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's beautiful that churches can offer that. I've seen, though, that even though that remains the case, that I feel like there are some opportunities and skills related to this that are people don't have as much in our society. I'm thinking of I know, Shannon, as we record this, you guys are in the middle of Vacation Bible School. And that's the kind of thing that I think in generations past, there were all sorts of volunteers that would be able to run something like that. And I think just the reality of working life today, that both parents are usually in the workforce, aging grandparent types are working later and later in life. They're just not available to create some of these spaces that churches have relied on. I also think that because people are experiencing what Luke's describing, this isolation and lack of friendship outside the church, that when they do show up at church, that maybe there's some, for lack of a better word, social skills and a desire to initiate friendship and do the work for friendship that people don't necessarily come with. So when they do end up in these spaces, they might bristle a little bit and have a difficult time, even if the church can provide a great space for them to connect. They may bristle to connect. I remember someone who's a dear friend of ours now said that they visited our church half a dozen times and didn't make it out of the parking lot because they were so overwhelmed before they finally came. And this is someone who is a good friend. Before that even happened, I didn't know that was happening. But people are hungry for this, as Luke mentions, but they don't necessarily know how to do it or what to do with it when they get it.
Well, and Chris, I think the onus is really on us, right? In creating spaces for people to find that connection. It's not for the person that's coming to us. How do we, make things accessible for them to find that sense of community and relationship? And I'm excited about one of our guests this season, David Kim, who works in a very large church and had to come to terms with this when there was a small group that he was a part of, and they had been a part of this group for 3 years or something. And some situation happened with one of the guys in the group, and it was a pretty significant scenario. And they basically stopped their programming to really care for this person. And what they discovered during that time was they really didn't know each other. They were so intent on, checking the boxes and doing the program, and that they really didn't know each other. And it was that particular situation that precipitated them changing how those groups formed in the future. And David's role as the discipleship person for this church, he had to really rethink how those connections are fostered from the beginning, and how that culture really needed to shift for people to be able to make those connections and form relationships, because it was obviously the depth of those relationships just accelerated what was possible within that group, because they took the time to do that.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. it's what you're describing is really a discipleship issue in
Yeah.
some ways that we don't necessarily consider a discipleship issue. Do people have the skills to be in these spaces where they can be formed? And maybe part of maybe it's not just putting an invite on the calendar, but teaching people how to interact in those spaces. That's really
and I
helpful.
think that we have equated discipleship with education, rather than transformation and that relational quality, and that's undermined. It's been detrimental to our own formation.
Yeah. It doesn't matter how good your systematic theology or whatever is if you're still kind of a jerk.
Or your curriculum or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's shift a little bit, and I'm going to let Shannon start us off with this, and you guys feel free to jump in. But I want to think about specifically what we do here at Fresh Expressions, this idea of contextual forms of church or missional communities. And I was hoping, Shannon, maybe you could just give us a brief introduction to what those are and why you think that approach to church and mission really can address loneliness and isolation.
Yeah, so fresh. So I would say, in sort of the way that we've done church, as we've talked about before, it's been so much come to our worship services and come to our events and come to our programs and get information, and make your way, and slowly maybe you can begin to experience like, oh, I want to become a member. I want to belong here, right? But there's this like giant step between people's everyday life and stepping into some event or service that is like this giant leap from where we are. So Fresh Expressions is about flipping that. And what if the church took a giant step towards you in the everyday places and spaces and needs and networks and neighborhoods that you're in? And how can we help people experience the kingdom of God right there? So if you think about like if you're familiar with Costco, like if you go to Costco and there's like all of these things that are like an arm, like all of these items that you don't know anything about, and they're over an arm's length away, right? But what Costco realized is if we could give you a taste of something, then you would know a little bit about, what that item is. And what winds up happening then is people are like, oh, well, I would have never picked that up, but that is delicious. And so, so think about it this way, like that the church can come near to where people are and help them experience community with God and community with others and purpose and belonging right in the midst of their everyday life in a way that actually feels like good news. And it's like they got a taste of it. And so instead of come to us and get information, how do we go to people in our neighborhoods or in the things we like to do, whether that's pickleball or hiking or going to playground with our kids, or whether it's a passion that we care about and we care about it with other people. Like, how do we do these things with God and with other people in such a way that a community can form right there that reflects the priorities of Jesus and gives people a taste of the community of the kingdom of God? And I think that's where the breakthrough is. It's not in the performance. It's not in the information. It's in the experience and the taste of community. That's where the breakthrough in this experience of loneliness and isolation can happen. And I think that's what the church is invited to step into.
Yeah. Do you guys have anything to add to that? What do you think about it is unique to Fresh Expressions, these contextual forms of church that can help with loneliness and isolation?
I know Heather's shared an article with us or a online conversations at Reddit or something, but I consistently see online when people are trying to find connection, that the recommendation comes up to like join a group that's doing something that you like to do. That's like one of the best ways to build friendships in today's culture. And so that's Fresh Expressions 101 is kind of creating gatherings around shared interests. So I think I don't know that was intentional, but it definitely seems to be a bullseye for what our culture needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think a lot of what Fresh Expressions affords our churches is this it's a new perspective. It is a paradigm shift in how we think about what it means to be the church and connecting with our communities, and a reality check on a lot of the assumptions that we make. And that, to Shannon's point, rather than, come to us at our convenience, right? Where we feel comfortable, right? And rather than how do we meet people where they are, where they feel comfortable with what makes sense to them at their convenience. And I think it requires, honestly, some humility and really challenging a lot of those assumptions that we make. And I do think a lot of what we share and a lot of our training helps shift some of those paradigms and open up new perspectives and therefore possibilities that frankly really excite people and get people excited about, what it really means to be the church now.
Yeah, that's great. So, Luke, you've done a lot of work around this. We'll talk a little bit about your book in a second, but you've done a lot of work around what we call the Fresh Expressions journey. It's funny, this came up with me. I was speaking with a gentleman who's pursuing church planting right now and trying to understand the difference between this, what you might call like a big launch church plant, and what we do at Fresh Expressions. One of the things with a big launch church plant is that you use marketing and whatever you can to gather a crowd of people, hoping that a core of that crowd can build up to eventually become a sustainable church community. And in Fresh Expressions, we take a really different route. And this idea of building community is really essential to that. I was wondering if you could kind of unpack that and why building community is essential to the Fresh Expressions journey.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, Fresh Expressions take shape over time. And so it begins with a period of listening, and that's listening to God, but also listening to your neighbors in a deep and personal way, and in a way that starts to build relationships. And then the next stage is to then build relationships with neighbors, to, invest in existing relationships, but also try to find ways to meet new people. And out of those kind of one-on-one conversations, we look for ways to gather a community. And then as we gather a community, a lot of Fresh Expressions start with social community before becoming a spiritual community. Not all of them. Some of them have a spiritual element from the beginning. But so then that next stage is then exploring discipleship with the group of people you're connecting with. And then out of that, church takes shape. And then the last stage is often one Fresh Expression will lead to multiple Fresh Expressions. So it's what I've found as I've learned about the loneliness epidemics. I've learned about this feeling of our society lacking a place to belong. That the Fresh Expressions journey is just perfectly created as an antidote to that. That to be listened to is one theologian says it's so close to being loved that you can hardly tell the difference. That building relationships and investing in relationships at the forefront, that's saying that's one of the most important parts of church is relationships, where a lot of people that go to church would not say that. And so, that's prioritizing relationships, and then it's being intentional about building community. And an essential part of community is that people belong, that people are valued, that people feel like this is a place for them. So there's just a big intentionality on the front end of starting Fresh Expressions to help people find a place where they can build meaningful relationships. And that's really, loneliness is a perceived lack of meaningful connection. And so if you're starting a Fresh Expression the right way, that's 100% what you're thinking about at the beginning. Whereas the church planting model you mentioned, where you're trying to build a crowd, like building a crowd is not about building meaningful connection. It's about creating a show that people want to come to. And so, yeah, that's why Fresh Expressions really addresses loneliness so well.
There's this kind of disconnect there with, I would say, more traditional church planning models, not all church planning models, but traditional church planning models, the end goal being that, that opening worship service, or, and so we're moving toward this crowd, this worship service versus, really taking the time to build that sense of community and belonging where everybody's gifts are recognized and, and put to use for the greater good, et cetera. And I don't want to misquote anyone, but I do think, I know it's been said that if you really are focused on the community to begin with, that you might get a church, but if you just focus on, the worship service, then you might get a worship service, I don't know. So there's a big difference there in how you go about things. At the end of the day, I was talking with one of our other trainers the other day about this. Whether it becomes a mature expression of church or not, all of those steps that we take in the Fresh Expressions journey, the listening, the loving and serving and building community and belonging, those are all, I think, practices and postures that the church as we know it, the church that we have inherited, can benefit from being reminded of and practicing and embodying. To honestly be the salt and light in our communities that may or may not become a worshiping community wherever it is. But there's a lot for us to learn, I believe, and that we do learn along the way about who we are, who God is, who our community is, that just continues to bear fruit in a number of ways.
And to be totally clear, we love all kinds of new churches here at Fresh Expressions, in any form. And I know where I live, that still has some, let's call it, the Bible Belt still has a hold.
You're still in the last bastion of Christendom there in Texas.
I am, yeah. And because of that, I think some of these other approaches are really great for folks who are looking for a church and can't find one, or maybe are dissatisfied with their church community. And we're a big fan of any kind of new church that's going to engage new people in the mission of God. So please don't hear any of this as criticism of particular models.
And if you build a crowd, you can build communities within that crowd. So some people, a lot of churches do that, small groups, stuff like that.
Good, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's move on a little bit to try to get some specific, tangible, helpful stuff here. Heather, we'll let you start, and anybody else who wants to jump in. But you're one of our key trainers and coaches, and we've already talked a little bit about the need for some skills around connecting, building community, honestly, just friendship, maybe. And I'm curious how, as a trainer and a coach, how you've helped folks do this better, either maybe as individual pioneers or, kind of to spread that value through a congregation.
Yeah, I would say to begin with, particularly in our pioneer cohorts and training, that I try to kind of break down this whole idea of the solo heroic leader, and I've got to go do this thing on my own and make this happen, et cetera. So from the front side, it's really about team and partners, and recognizing where you are gifted and where maybe you need some that accompaniment of someone who has different gifts and a different skill set. And so we talk about the pioneers, but we also talk about the supporters. Who are the people that are going to come alongside that are going to support you through their prayers, through action in some way, that are going to help you execute whatever it is in whatever way, shape, or form. But having that the support of the larger congregation as well, that we're not just kind of doing this whole thing in a silo over here, but how do we foster that sense of connection and strengthen those bridges with the existing congregation to whatever it is. And a lot of that comes with, sharing what's happening, involving people and what are your next steps, and prayer and support in whatever other ways there might be needed. But telling those stories of what God's doing and how God is moving and in your own life and the life of the the team that's maybe getting it started, how you're, learning things about your community that maybe you didn't know before, and how God's working in people's lives as that community is forming. So I think, those stories are really, really important, recognizing that, we have for a very long time operated out of this sense of like solo heroic leadership when frankly, God made us for relationship, all of us, and none of us is meant to do any of this alone, any of life alone, period. And reminding folks that Jesus sent people out 2 by 2, that we're not supposed to go do this, on our own. And there is something significant to that. Again, on the front side, on the other side of building community is how do we meet people where they are? How do we connect with people? And a lot of that comes with those listening skills and asking more questions rather than trying to give answers to people that aren't asking to questions people aren't asking, and just being more curious about people, and so really kind of developing some of those qualities and how we cultivate relationships, and doing a lot better job of listening and asking questions and being curious versus trying to, create some kind of a transactional type environment, right? And so I think that's really important. And then asking for help, along the way, asking for help, whether it be from the church or from, we talk about looking for people of peace in our larger community to help really deepen that connection with whatever group of people we're trying to build community with, because there is such trust that just comes with that person of peace, where it might take me years to build that trust with that particular community. I know Luke talks about this in Becoming Church as well, about finding that person of peace and how that person of peace can really just accelerate that sense of community and belonging, because that person throws their trust in your direction. So I think all of those elements are really important to our training and how we really talk about forming community and belonging with our neighbors.
That's great. Well, let's do a couple of rapid fire questions. I'd like to just go around really quickly and provide some tangible examples for folks. So I'd love for each of you guys to share a couple of examples you've seen of a particular fresh expression. What if it has a name, who it's reaching, and how you've seen it building community. So to give you guys an example, I actually was inspired by Luke. I think before either of us had kids, I heard him mention something about a group in the UK called Who Let the Dads Out. And I did no research. I just really liked the name. And when we had our first, in about 6 months into the pandemic, I knew that there were a lot of groups online and folks that were meeting outside where things seemed safe then. And there's a local brewery down the road from me where people were where they have a space for kids to play, and so I just made a Facebook invite and put it on every neighborhood group. I made a few flyers and I started talking to random people I would meet at parks playing with their kids, and said, can you come to Who Let the Dads Out on Saturday morning at 10? We've been doing that now for about 2.5 years, since my now 3-year-old was 6 months old, and we have a great sense of community. Folks that wouldn't know each other otherwise. Now we're still, struggling in our fresh expressions journey of moving beyond building community, but it's really fun. I will have folks walk up to me now and ask about it, or recognize me from that event, walk up to me in parks or splash pads or things like that. Or I'll mention it to someone there and they'd be like, oh, my wife already told me about that or something like that. But it's just been a great example of, here was a group of people who were hungry for connection. I was hearing that from dads all over, but didn't know how to do it. Just giving it a name and a space, immediately there was a response to that. So anybody else want to just share like a few examples of where you've seen fresh expressions building community?
There was a young woman in one of our pioneer cohorts that was sure that she was supposed to start something in particular because of the church that she was serving at the time. She actually was a pastor, is a pastor, and was just coming up against so many obstacles. And one of the regular things that she would do is there was another person on the staff at the church that had young children. And when they would kind of close down their business day, they would go across the street to a park with their kids and play. And they had other people start to join them, other people that they started forming relationships with in the park. And she started bringing popsicles for the kids and, whatever. And this group just continued to grow. And they would pray together and then play together. So they called it Pray and Play. And this group just grew exponentially. And she was just absolutely shocked at how she thought it was one thing. And she was working so hard to try to make this one thing happen. But it was just a part of what her everyday life was, and just, paying attention, being very intentional. And that's what God did. That's where that community was really born and strengthened and developed over time. It's just grown exponentially since then and become, frankly, a large part of what's happening in our community. To where I think the mayor came out at like Easter or something. So,
wow.
So that's one of my favorite stories. Yeah, that's one of my favorite stories. Yeah.
One of my favorite stories was a fresh expression in kind of the among people who enjoyed blues music. It wasn't musicians. It was people who just enjoyed listening to blues music and going to concerts. And so the Pioneer would just kind of have meetups at different local places that had blues nights, right? And what really he did to build community was just start dancing with people and experiencing the lyrics, which actually are lament. Blues is like a voiced lament, right? And so in using those, like the blues, whatever was being sung, it was connecting him into conversations, deeper conversations with people about life and lament, right? Just naturally in that space. But there was a lot of playfulness to it. And I started watching him. He would dance with somebody and then he would hand them over to somebody else and say, oh, here's a dance partner for you. So what he was doing was connecting people, not just with him, but with each other. And ultimately, as this group matured and they actually started to have blues church worship experiences, they had it in a local, blues bar that on a Sunday afternoon when there was nobody in a blues bar. and the whole experience would start, you would throw $5 in the kitty for the dance instructor who was teaching blues dancing. And so the whole first 45 minutes of the experience was that you were changing partners and learning blues dancing with other people. And so before you ever even prayed together, you had laughed together and stumbled together, and you had met everybody in that room. And it just equalized and fostered this sense of connectedness that then spilled over into a time of sharing prayer concerns and praying for each other, and spilled over into hamburgers around the tables as people ordered their lunch and had a meal together and had some faith conversation around their meal. But I just loved, I think that community is often built in playing together. And so if you can, so as you connect, playing and enjoying something together and having ways to enter into deeper conversation of sharing of stories and connecting over some of the similar difficulties in life, like something beautiful happens.
One of our, actually a church plant, I guess planted about 20 years ago, West UMC in Mooresville, North Carolina. They have kind of stumbled on a formula for starting fresh expressions that involves meetup.com. They train leaders from their church that are interested in something, whether it's golf or paddleboarding and gathering at the pub, Gen Z gatherings that go to do karaoke and Top Golf, stuff like that. But they have spun off multiple Fresh Expression. I think they're up to like 8 now. And a lot of it has to do with just using meetup.com, which in a urban setting in particular is a great way to find people that are looking for community. And then another one, a more rural example, is Randall by the River. It's a United Methodist congregation, and they just offer a fun event once a month. They call it a bridge event. And so they've done charcuterie board lessons and dog biscuit baking and art classes, or try to find something fun to do once a month. And the ratio of neighbors to church members is, might have 15 church members and 30 of their neighbors that aren't connected to church. So finding a great way to open up space for belonging there.
I think belonging is so significant. I don't think we can overstate that enough because, again, I think we have to find ways as we're looking to foster this sense of community and belonging for people to be a part of what's happening. And rather than, again, having this kind of, we're going to do something to people or for people, but how do we create that community that has that withness quality to it? And so it's constantly just inviting people into being a part of what's happening and creating space for that to happen and access for that to happen and being really intentional about that. Some places it can be a little bit more challenging than others, but then people stepping up and, and being a part of, leading the conversation or, deciding they want to share something they wrote or sing something, or whatever, but creating space for that to happen so that everybody can be a part of that community and bring their own gifts and passions to bear in that community.
That's great. Okay, so a couple things real quick, just to wrap things up. Heather, tell us about one or two of the conversations you're looking forward to this season on the podcast.
Oh my goodness. I think one of the things that I have recognized over the interviews that I've had with our guests this season is they all have had their own experiences of loneliness as a result of different circumstances or situations that they've been in, and how each one of them has uniquely responded to their own experience and trying to help other people navigate that in their own lives, and specifically addressing the church in that. And so I think that there's something for everyone in this season. There's going to be places of resonance for everyone in this season, and maybe their own experiences or things that they've encountered within their church as they've tried to connect with their community. I don't know where to start. There's so many great guests this season. I just look forward to being able to share all these interviews with our audience.
That's great. Hey, Luke, real quick, we're celebrating because we just got our second printing of your book, Becoming Church, and people will hear more about that. But just briefly, what do you think it is about that book that's resonated with folks?
I think it is just kind of landed at a time when we're emerging from the pandemic and people were longing for connection and community and kind of a trail guide for forming that. I wrote it to be super approachable, super practical. So there's lots of little ideas sprinkled throughout it, lots of stories of just everyday people that are starting fresh expressions that are connecting with their neighbors. And so I think that's probably why it's resonating, that it's a proven pathway that started in England in 2004. And as we've been adapting as we go along here in the US. And I think it's just landed at the right time.
Love it. Shannon, for folks who listen to this and they're excited about some of these ideas, how can we help them out over here at Fresh Expressions North America?
Yeah, I think, we have lots of different trainings, but I think if you're excited, get involved in some of the connecting points with other people who are trying this. This summer we have the summer book club, but in the fall we'll be having monthly online gatherings of people who just kind of want to connect with other people who are doing this work. And and share where they are on the journey. And then we have, as Heather talked about, a pioneer cohort, which is just a really great opportunity to start stepping into this posture, to learn how to listen well, and to have some practical activities to start implementing in your setting to build relationships and to deepen community. And you get to do that with other people. So it makes you less lonely, and it actually puts you in the space where you are investing in the lives of other people in your community and experiencing it really is like the more you give, the more you receive. Like, as we do that, we discover that we're less lonely too. It's investing in other people. Like, we are growing as disciples, and a sense of connection with God as we're helping others to find deeper connection. It's a beautiful synergy. Those who lose their life will gain it. Like, that's what Jesus told us. Yeah. And Jesus told us that no matter what, God is always going to be with us, as we go out and make disciples. I will be with you till the end of the age. And so as we do that with God, we will be less lonely and the world will be less lonely. And I think the cohort can really give you handholds for living that out.
All right. Well, head over to freshexpressions.com to learn more about all those opportunities. Thank you guys so much for all your time. Heather, thanks for all of your work pulling this season together. And thank you, Shannon and Luke, for jumping on to put together this introduction. I'm excited. There were so many things you guys mentioned that I wish we could have spent an entire episode on. So I think we're going to get some really, really helpful stuff. Thank you to everyone who's listening. And we look forward to catching up with you online and in future trainings. God bless.
Fresh Expressions is a worldwide movement of everyday missionaries who want to see churches thrive in the places we live, eat, work, and play by leveraging the creativity and endurance of the inherited church. To learn a simple 5-phase process for starting a new expression of church, go to freshexpressions.com/how-to-start. Want to learn more from the Fresh Expressions team? Head over to freshexpressions.com/training to learn ways we can work together to provide coaching, training, and inspiration for your church or organization. You can also get more resources like this on FX Connect, an online community full of other church leaders passionate about reaching new people in new places. Access our entire library of practical and inspiring training materials and connect with other church leaders at fxconnectus.org. Season 5 of the Fresh Expressions podcast is hosted by me, Heather Jallad. It's edited by Joel Limbaum and produced by Jeanette Statz, Kathleen Blackie, and Chris Morton. Our U.S. Director of Ministries is Shannon Kiser, and our Senior Director is Dr. Christopher Backert. If you have learned something or been encouraged by this podcast, please help us spread the word. You can give us a review on Apple Music or Spotify and share this episode on social media. Now may God bless you in your work for the kingdom.